Chapter 10 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. In the morning it was bright, and they were sprinkling the streets of the town, and we all had breakfast in a cafe. Bayonne is a nice town. It is like a very clean Spanish town, and it is on a big river. Already, so early in the morning, it was very hot on the bridge across the river. We walked out on the bridge, and then took a walk through the town. I was not at all sure Mike's rods would come from Scotland in time, so we hunted a tackle store and finally bought a rod for Bill upstairs over a dry goods store. The man who sold the tackle was out. We had to wait for him to come back. Finally he came in, and we bought a pretty good rod cheap, and 2 landing nets. We went out into the street again and took a look at the cathedral. Cohn made some remark about it being a very good example of something or other. I forget what. It seemed like a nice cathedral, nice and dim like Spanish churches. Then we went up past the old fort and out to the local Syndicat d'Initiative office, where the bus was supposed to start from. There they told us the bus service did not start until the 1st of July. We found out at the tourist office what we ought to pay for a motor car to Pamplona, and hired one at a big garage just around the corner from the municipal theater, for 400 francs. The car was to pick us up at the hotel in 40 minutes. We stopped at the cafe on the square where we had eaten breakfast, and had a beer. It was hot, but the town had a cool, fresh, early morning smell, and it was pleasant sitting in the cafe. A breeze started to blow, and you could feel that the air came from the sea. There were pigeons out in the square, and the houses were a yellow sun-baked color, and I did not want to leave the cafe, but we had to go to the hotel to get our bags packed and pay the bill. We paid for the beers, we matched, and I think Cohn paid, and went up to the hotel. It was only 16 francs apiece for Bill and me, with 10% added for the service, and we had the bags sent down and waited for Robert Cohn. While we were waiting, I saw a cockroach on the parquet floor that must have been at least 3 inches long. I pointed him out to Bill, and then put my shoe on him. We agreed he must have just come in from the garden. It was really an awfully clean hotel. Cohn came down finally, and we all went out to the car. It was a big closed car with a driver in a white duster with blue collar and cuffs. We had him put the back of the car down. He piled in the bags, and we started off up the street and out of the town. We passed some lovely gardens and had a good look back at the town, and then we were out in the country, green and rolling, and the road climbing all the time. We passed lots of Basques with oxen or cattle hauling carts along the road, and nice farmhouses, low roofs, and all white plastered. In the Basque country, the land all looks very rich and green, and the houses and villages look well off and clean. Every village had a pelota court, and on some of them kids were playing in the hot sun. There were signs on the walls of the churches saying it was forbidden to play pelota against them, and the houses in the villages had red-tiled roofs, and then the road turned off and commenced to climb, and we're going way up close along a hillside, with a valley below, and hills stretched off back toward the sea. You couldn't see the sea, it was too far away. You could only see hills and more hills, and you knew where the sea was. We crossed the Spanish frontier. There was a little stream and a bridge, and Spanish carbineers with patent-leather Bonaparte hats, and short guns on their backs, on one side and on the other, fat Frenchmen in capes and mustaches. They only opened one bag and took the passports in and looked at them. There was a general store and inn on each side of the line. The chauffeur had to go in and fill out some papers about the car. We got out and went over to the stream to see if there were any trout. Bill tried to talk some Spanish with one of the carabineers, but it did not go very well. Robert Cohn asked, pointing with his finger, if there were any trout in the stream, and the carabineer said yes, but not many. I asked him if he ever fished, and he said no, that he didn't care for it. Just then an old man with long sunburned hair and beard, and clothes that looked as though they were made of gunny sacking, came striding up to the bridge. He was carrying a long staff, and he had a kid slung on his back, tied by the 4 legs, the head hanging down. The carabinier waved him back with his sword. The man turned without saying anything, and started back up the white road into Spain. "What's the matter with the old one?" I asked. "He hasn't got any passport." I offered the guard a cigarette. He took it and thanked me. "What will he do?" I asked. The guard spat in the dust. "Oh, he'll just wade across the stream." "Do you have much smuggling?" "Oh," he said, "they go through." The chauffeur came out, folding up the papers and putting them in the inside pocket of his coat. We all got in the car, and it started up the white, dusty road into Spain. For a while the country was much as it had been. Then, climbing all the time, we crossed the top of a col, the road winding back and forth on itself, and then it was really Spain. There were long brown mountains, and a few pines and far-off forests of beech trees on some of the mountain sides. The road went along the summit of the col, and then dropped down, and the driver had to honk and slow up and turn out to avoid running into two donkeys that were sleeping in the road. We came down out of the mountains and through an oak forest, and there were white cattle grazing in the forest. Down below there were grassy plains and clear streams. Then we crossed a stream and went through a gloomy little village, and started to climb again. We climbed up and crossed another high col, and turned along it, and the road ran down to the right. We saw a whole new range of mountains off to the south, all brown and baked-looking, and furrowed in strange shapes. After a while we came out of the mountains, and there were trees along both sides of the road, and a stream and ripe fields of grain, and the road went on very white and straight ahead, and then lifted to a little rise, and off on the left was a hill with an old castle, with buildings close around it, and a field of grain going right up to the walls and shifting in the wind. I was up in front with the driver, and I turned around. Robert Cohn was asleep, but Bill looked and nodded his head. Then we crossed a wide plain, and there was a big river off on the right, shining in the sun from between the line of trees, and away off you could see the plateau of Pamplona rising out of the plain, and the walls of the city, and the great brown cathedral, and the broken skyline of the other churches. In back of the plateau were the mountains, and every way you looked there were other mountains, and ahead the road stretched out white across the plain going toward Pamplona. We came into the town on the other side of the plateau, the road slanting up steeply and dustily, with shade trees on both sides, and then leveling out through the new part of town they were building up outside the old walls. We passed the bull ring, high and white and concrete-looking in the sun, and then came into the big square by a side street and stopped in front of the Hotel Montoya. The driver helped us down with the bags. There was a crowd of kids watching the car, and the square was hot, and the trees were green, and the flags hung on their staffs, and it was good to get out of the sun and under the shade of the arcade that runs all the way around the square. Montoya was glad to see us, and shook hands and gave us good rooms looking out on the square, and then we washed and cleaned up and went downstairs in the dining room for lunch. The driver stayed for lunch too, and afterward we paid him, and he started back to Bayonne. There are two dining rooms in the Montoya. One is upstairs on the second floor and looks out on the square. The other is down one floor below the level of the square, and has a door that opens on the back street that the bulls pass along when they run through the streets early in the morning on their way to the ring. It is always cool in the downstairs dining room, and we had a very good lunch. The first meal in Spain was always a shock, with the hors d'oeuvres and egg course, 2 meat courses, vegetables, salad, and dessert and fruit. You have to drink plenty of wine to get it all down. Robert Cohn tried to say he did not want any of the second meat course, but we would not interpret for him, and so the waitress brought him something else as a replacement, a plate of cold meats, I think. Cohn had been rather nervous ever since we had met at Bayonne. He did not know whether we knew Brett had been with him at San Sebastian, and it made him rather awkward. "Well," I said, "Brett and Mike ought to get in tonight." "I'm not sure they'll come," Cohn said. "Why not?" Bill said. "Of course they'll come." "They're always late," I said. "I rather think they're not coming," Robert Cohn said. He said it with an air of superior knowledge that irritated both of us. I'll bet you 50 pesetas they're here tonight, Bill said. He always bets when he is angered, so he usually bets foolishly. I'll take it, Cohn said. Good. You remember it, Jake. 50 pesetas. I'll remember it myself, Bill said. I saw he was angry and wanted to smooth him down. It's a sure thing they'll come, I said, but maybe not tonight. Want to call it off? Cohn asked. No, why should I? Make it 100 if you like. All right, I'll take that. That's enough, I said, or you'll have to make a book and give me some of it. I'm satisfied, Cohn said. He smiled. You'll probably win it back at bridge anyway. You haven't got it yet, Bill said. We went out to walk around under the arcade to the Café Iruña for coffee. Cohn said he was going over and get a shave. Say, Bill said to me, have I got any chance on that bet? You've got a rotten chance. They've never been on time anywhere. If their money doesn't come, it's a cinch they won't get in tonight. I was sorry as soon as I opened my mouth, but I had to call him. He's all right, I guess, but where does he get this inside stuff? Mike and Brett fixed it up with us about coming down here. I saw Cohn coming over across the square. Here he comes. Well, let him not get superior and Jewish. The barber shop's closed, Cohn said. It's not open till 4. We had coffee at the Iruña, sitting in comfortable wicker chairs looking out from the cool of the arcade at the big square. After a while, Bill went to write some letters, and Cohn went over to the barber shop. It was still closed, so he decided to go up to the hotel and get a bath. And I sat out in front of the cafe and then went for a walk in the town. It was very hot, but I kept on the shady side of the streets, went through the market, and had a good time seeing the town again. I went to the ayuntamiento and found the old gentleman who subscribes for the bullfight tickets for me every year, and he had gotten the money I sent him from Paris, and renewed my subscriptions, so that was all set. He was the archivist, and all the archives of the town were in his office. That has nothing to do with the story. Anyway, his office had a green baize door and a big wooden door, and when I went out I left him sitting among the archives that covered all the walls, and I shut both the doors. And as I went out of the building into the street, the porter stopped me to brush off my coat. You must have been in a motor car, he said. The back of the collar and the upper part of the shoulders were gray with dust. From Bayonne. Well, well, he said, I knew you were in a motor car from the way the dust was, so I gave him 2 copper coins. At the end of the street I saw the cathedral and walked up toward it. The first time I ever saw it I thought the facade was ugly, but I liked it now. I went inside. It was dim and dark, and the pillars went high up, and there were people praying, and it smelled of incense. And there were some wonderful big windows. I knelt and started to pray, and prayed for everybody I thought of, Brett and Mike and Bill and Robert Cohn and myself and all the bullfighters, separately for the ones I liked, and lumping all the rest. Then I prayed for myself again, and while I was praying for myself, I found I was getting sleepy. So I prayed that the bullfights would be good, and that it would be a fine fiesta, and that we would get some fishing. I wondered if there was anything else I might pray for, and I thought I would like to have some money. So I prayed that I would make a lot of money, and then I started to think how I would make it. And thinking of making money reminded me of the Count, and I started wondering about where he was, and regretting I hadn't seen him since that night in Montmartre, and about something funny Brett told me about him. And as all the time I was kneeling with my forehead on the wood in front of me, and was thinking of myself as praying, I was a little ashamed, and regretted that I was such a rotten Catholic, but realized there was nothing I could do about it, at least for a while, and maybe never, but that anyway it was a grand religion, and I only wished I felt religious. Maybe I would the next time. And then I was out in the hot sun on the steps of the cathedral, and the forefingers and the thumb of my right hand were still damp, and I felt them dry in the sun. The sunlight was hot and hard, and I crossed over beside some buildings and walked back along side streets to the hotel. At dinner that night we found that Robert Cohn had taken a bath, had had a shave and a haircut and a shampoo, and something put on his hair afterward to make it stay down. He was nervous, and I did not try to help him any. The train was due in at 9 o'clock from San Sebastian, and if Brett and Mike were coming, they would be on it. At 20 minutes to 9, we were not half through dinner. Robert Cohn got up from the table and said he would go to the station. I said I would go with him, just to devil him. Bill said he would be damned if he would leave his dinner. I said we would be right back. We walked to the station. I was enjoying Cohn's nervousness. I hoped Brett would be on the train. The station, the train was late. We sat on a baggage truck and waited outside in the dark. I've never seen a man in civil life as nervous as Robert Cohn, nor as eager. I was enjoying it. It was lousy to enjoy it, but I felt lousy. Cohn had a wonderful quality of bringing out the worst in anybody. After a while, we heard the train whistle way off below on the other side of the plateau. Then we saw the headlight coming up the hill. We went inside the station and stood with a crowd of people just back of the gates. The train came in and stopped, and everybody started coming out through the gates. They were not in the crowd. We waited till everybody had gone through and out of the station and gotten into buses or taken cabs or were walking with their friends or relatives through the dark into the town. I knew they wouldn't come, Robert said. We were going back to the hotel. I thought they might, I said. Bill was eating fruit when we came in and finishing a bottle of wine. Didn't come, eh? No. Do you mind if I give you that 100 pesetas in the morning, Cohn? Bill asked. I haven't changed any money yet. Oh, forget about it, Robert Cohn said. Let's bet on something else. Can you bet on bullfights? You could, Bill said, but you don't need to. Be like betting on the war, I said. You don't need any economic interest. I'm very curious to see them, Robert said. Montoya came up to our table. He had a telegram in his hand. It's for you. He handed it to me. It read, Stopped night, San Sebastian. It's from them, I said. I put it in my pocket. Ordinarily, I should have handed it over. They've stopped over in San Sebastian, I said. Send their regards to you. Why I felt that impulse to devil him, I do not know. Of course I do know. I was blind, unforgivingly jealous of what had happened to him. The fact that I took it as a matter of course did not alter that any. I certainly did hate him. I do not think I ever really hated him until he had that little spell of superiority at lunch, that and when he went through all that barbering. So I put the telegram in my pocket. The telegram came to me anyway. Well, I said, we ought to pull out on the noon bus for Borghete. They can follow us if they get in tomorrow night. There are only 2 trains up from San Sebastian, and an early morning train, and the one we had just met. That sounds like a good idea, Cohn said. The sooner we get on the stream, the better. It's all one to me when we start, Bill said. The sooner the better. We sat in the Iruña for a while, and had coffee, and then took a little walk out to the bull ring, and across the field, and under the trees at the edge of the cliff, and looked down at the river in the dark. I turned in early. Bill and Cohn stayed out in the cafe quite late, I believe, because I was asleep when they came in. In the morning I bought 3 tickets for the bus to Borghete. It was scheduled to leave at 2 o'clock. There was nothing earlier. I was sitting over at the Iruña reading the papers when I saw Robert Cohn coming across the square. He came up to the table and sat down in one of the wicker chairs. This is a comfortable cafe, he said. Did you have a good night, Jake? I slept like a log. I didn't sleep very well. Bill and I were out late, too. Where were you? Here, and after it shut, we went over to that other cafe. The old man there speaks German and English. That's Café Suizo. That's it. He seems like a nice old fellow. I think it's a better cafe than this one. It's not so good in the daytime, I said. Too hot. By the way, I got the bus tickets. I'm not going up today. You and Bill go on ahead. I've got your ticket. Give it to me. I'll get the money back. It's 5 pesetas. Robert Cohn took out a silver 5 peseta piece and gave it to me. I ought to stay, he said. You see, I'm afraid there's some sort of misunderstanding. Why, I said. They may not come here for 3 or 4 days now if they start on parties at San Sebastian. "That's just it," said Robert. "I'm afraid they expected to meet me at San Sebastian, and that's why they stopped over." "What makes you think that?" "Well, I wrote suggesting it to Brett." "Why in hell didn't you stay there and meet them, then?" I started to say, but I stopped. I thought that idea would come to him by itself, but I do not believe it ever did. He was being confidential now, and it was giving him pleasure to be able to talk with the understanding that I knew there was something between him and Brett. "Well, Bill and I will go up right after lunch," I said. "I wish I could go. We've been looking forward to the fishing all winter." He was being sentimental about it. "But I ought to stay. I really ought. As soon as they come, I'll bring them right up." "Let's find Bill." "I want to go over to the barber shop." "See you at lunch." I found Bill up in his room. He was shaving. "Oh, yes, he told me about it last night," Bill said. "He is a great little confider. He said he had a date with Brett at San Sebastian. The lying bastard!" "Oh, no," said Bill. "Don't get sore. Don't get sore at this stage of the trip. How did you ever happen to know this fellow, anyway?" "Don't rub it in." Bill looked round, half shaved, and then went on talking into the mirror while he lathered his face. "Didn't you send him with a letter to me in New York last winter? Thank God I'm a traveling man. Haven't you got some more Jewish friends you could bring along?" He rubbed his chin with his thumb, looked at it, and then started scraping again. "You've got some fine ones yourself." "Oh, yes, I've got some darbs, but not alongside of this Robert Cohn. The funny thing is he's nice, too. I like him, but he's just so awful." "He can be damn nice." "I know it. That's the terrible part." I laughed. "Yes, go on and laugh," said Bill. "You weren't out with him last night until 2 o'clock. Was he very bad?" "Awful. What's all this about him and Brett, anyway? Did she ever have anything to do with him?" He raised his chin up and pulled it from side to side. "Sure, she went down to San Sebastian with him." "What a damn fool thing to do. Why did she do that?" "She wanted to get out of town, and she can't go anywhere alone. She said she thought it would be good for him." What bloody fool things people do. Why didn't she go off with some of her own people? Or you? He slurred that over. Or me? Why not me? He looked at his face carefully in the glass, put a big dab of lather on each cheekbone. It's an honest face. It's a face any woman would be safe with. She's never seen it. She should have. All women should see it. It's a face that ought to be thrown on every screen in the country. Every woman ought to be given a copy of this face as she leaves the altar. Mothers should tell their daughters about this face. My son," he pointed the razor at me, "go west with this face, and grow up with the country." He ducked down to the bowl, rinsed his face with cold water, put on some alcohol, and then looked at himself carefully in the glass, pulling down his long upper lip. "My God," he said, "isn't it an awful face?" He looked in the glass. "And as for this Robert Cohn," Bill said, "he makes me sick, and he can go to hell, and I'm damn glad he's staying here so we won't have him fishing with us." "You're damn right. We're going trout fishing. We're going trout fishing in the Irati River. And we're going to get tight now at lunch on the wine of the country, and then take a swell bus ride." "Come on, let's go over to the Iruña and start," I said. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. It was baking hot in the square when we came out after lunch with our bags and the rod case to go to Brigitte. People were on top of the bus, and others were climbing up a ladder. Bill went up, and Robert sat beside Bill to save a place for me, and I went back in the hotel to get a couple of bottles of wine to take with us. When I came out, the bus was crowded. Men and women were sitting on all the baggage and boxes on top, and the women all had their fans going in the sun. It certainly was hot. Robert climbed down, and I fitted into the place he had saved on the one wooden seat that ran across the top. Robert Cohn stood in the shade of the arcade waiting for us to start. A Basque with a big leather wine bag in his lap lay across the top of the bus in front of our seat, leaning back against our legs. He offered the wineskin to Bill and to me, and when I tipped it up to drink, He imitated the sound of a klaxon motor horn so well and so suddenly that I spilled some of the wine, and everybody laughed. He apologized and made me take another drink. He made the klaxon again a little later, and it fooled me the second time. He was very good at it. The bass liked it. The man next to Bill was talking to him in Spanish, and Bill was not getting it, so he offered the man one of the bottles of wine. The man waved it away. He said it was too hot, and he had drunk too much at lunch. When Bill offered the bottle the second time, he took a long drink, and then the bottle went all over that part of the bus. Everyone took a drink very politely, and then they made us cork it up and put it away. They all wanted us to drink from their leather wine bottles. They were peasants going up into the hills. Finally, after a couple more false klaxons, the bus started, and Robert Cohn waved goodbye to us, and all the bass waved goodbye to him. As soon as we started out on the road outside of town, it was cool. Felt nice riding high up and close under the trees. The bus went quite fast and made a good breeze, and as we went out along the road with the dust powdering the trees and down the hill, we had a fine view, back through the trees, of the town rising up from the bluff above the river. The Basque lying against my knees pointed out the view with the neck of the wine bottle and winked at us. He nodded his head. Pretty nice, eh? These Basques are swell people, Bill said. The Basque lying against my legs was tan the color of saddle leather. He wore a black smock like all the rest. There were wrinkles in his tanned neck. He turned around and offered his wine bag to Bill. Bill handed him one of our bottles. The Basque wagged a forefinger at him and handed the bottle back, slapping in the cork with the palm of his hand. He shoved the wine bag up. Arriba, arriba, he said. Lift it up. Bill raised the wineskin and let the stream of wine spurt out and into his mouth, his head tipped back. When he stopped drinking and tipped the leather bottle down, a few drops ran down his chin. No, no, several Basques said. Not like that. One snatched the bottle away from the owner, who was himself about to give a demonstration. He was a young fellow, and he held the wine bottle at full arm's length and raised it high up, squeezing the leather bag with his hand, so the stream of wine hissed into his mouth. He held the bag out there, the wine making a flat, hard trajectory into his mouth, and he kept on swallowing, smoothly and regularly. Hey, the owner of the bottle shouted, Whose wine is that? The drinker wagged his little finger at him and smiled at us with his eyes. Then he bit the stream off sharp, made a quick lift with the wine bag, and lowered it down to the owner. He winked at us. The owner shook the wineskin sadly. We passed through a town and stopped in front of the posada, and the driver took on several packages. Then we started on again, and outside the town the road commenced to mount. We were going through farming country with rocky hills that sloped down into the fields. The grain fields went up the hillsides. Now, as we went higher, there was a wind blowing the grain. The road was white and dusty, and the dust rose under the wheels and hung in the air behind us. The road climbed up into the hills and left the rich grain fields below. Now there were only patches of grain on the bare hillsides and on each side of the watercourses. We turned sharply out to the side of the road to give room to pass to a long string of 6 mules, following one after the other, hauling a high-hooded wagon loaded with freight. The wagon and the mules were covered with dust. Close behind was another string of mules and another wagon. This was loaded with lumber, and the arriero, driving the mules, leaned back and put on the thick wooden brakes as we passed. Up here the country was quite barren, and the hills were rocky and hard-baked clay furrowed by the rain. We came around a curve into a town, and on both sides opened up a sudden green valley. A stream went through the center of the town, and fields of grapes touched the houses. The bus stopped in front of a posada, and many of the passengers got down, and a lot of the baggage was unstrapped from the roof from under the big tarpaulins and lifted down. Bill and I got down and went into the posada. There was a low, dark room with saddles and harness, and hay forks made of white wood, and clusters of canvas rope-soled shoes, and hams and slabs of bacon and white garlics and long sausages hanging from the roof. It was cool and dusky. We stood in front of a long wooden counter with 2 women behind it serving drinks. Behind them were shelves stacked with supplies and goods. We each had an aguardiente and paid 40 centimes for the 2 drinks. I gave the woman 50 centimes to make a tip, and she gave me back the copper piece, thinking I had misunderstood the price. 2 of our Basques came in and insisted on buying a drink. So they bought a drink, and then we bought a drink, and then they slapped us on the back and bought another drink. Then we bought, and then we all went out into the sunlight and the heat and climbed back on top of the bus. There was plenty of room now for everyone to sit on the seat, and the Basque who had been lying on the tin roof now sat between us. The woman who had been serving drinks came out wiping her hands on her apron and talked to somebody inside the bus. Then the driver came out swinging 2 flat leather mail pouches and climbed up, and everybody waving, we started off. The road left the green valley at once, and we were up in the hills again. Bill and the wine-bottle Basque were having a conversation. A man leaned over from the other side of the seat and asked in English, "You're Americans?" "Sure. I've been there," he said, 40 years ago. He was an old man as brown as the others, with the stubble of a white beard. "How was it?" "What you say? How was America?" "Oh, I was in California. It was fine." "Why did you leave?" "What did you say?" "Why did you come back here?" "Oh, I come back to get married. I was going to go back, but my wife, she don't like to travel." "Where are you from?" "Kansas City." "I've been there," he said. "I've been in Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Denver, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City." He named them carefully. "How long were you over?" 15 years. Then I come back and got married." "Have a drink?" "All right," he said. "You can't get this in America, hey? There's plenty if you can pay for it." "What you come over here for?" "We're going to the fiesta at Pamplona." "You like the bullfights?" "Sure. Don't you?" "Yes," he said. "I guess I like them." Then after a little, "Where you go now?" "Up to Brighette to fish." "Well," he said, "I hope you catch something." He shook hands and turned around to the back seat again. The other Basque had been impressed. He sat back comfortably and smiled at me when I turned around to look at the country. But the effort of talking American seemed to have tired him. He did not say anything after that. The bus climbed steadily up the road. The country was barren and rocks stuck up through the clay. There was no grass beside the road. Looking back, we could see the country spread out below. Far back, the fields were squares of green and brown on the hillsides. Making the horizon were the brown mountains. They were strangely shaped. As we climbed higher, the horizon kept changing. As the bus ground slowly up the road, we could see other mountains coming up in the south. Then the road came up over the crest, flattened out, and went into a forest. It was a forest of cork oaks, and the sun came through the trees in patches, and there were cattle grazing back in the trees. We went through the forest, and the road came out and turned along a rise of land, and out ahead of us was a rolling green plain, with dark mountains beyond it. These were not like the brown heat-baked mountains we had left behind. These were wooded, and there were clouds coming down from them. The green plain stretched off. It was cut by fences, and the white of the road showed through the trunks of a double line of trees that crossed the plain toward the north. As we came to the edge of the rise, we saw the red roofs and the white houses of Brighette ahead strung out on the plain, and away off on the shoulder of the first dark mountain was the gray metal-sheathed roof of the monastery of Roncesvalles. "There's Roncesvalles," I said. "Where?" "Way off there where the mountain starts." "It's cold up here," Bill said. "It's high," I said. "Must be 1,200 meters." "It's awfully cold," Bill said. The bus leveled down onto the straight line of road that ran to Brighette. We passed a crossroads and crossed a bridge over a stream. The houses of Brighette were along both sides of the road. There were no side streets. We passed the church and the schoolyard, and the bus stopped. We got down, and the driver handed down our bags in the rod case. A carabinier in his cocked hat and yellow leather cross-straps came up. "What's in there?" He pointed to the rod case. I opened it and showed him. He asked to see our fishing permits, and I got them out. He looked at the date and then waved us on. "Is that all right?" I asked. "Yes, of course." We went up the street, past the whitewashed stone houses, families sitting in the doorways watching us, to the inn. The fat woman who ran the inn came out from the kitchen and shook hands with us. She took off her spectacles, wiped them, and put them on again. It was cold in the inn, and the wind started to blow outside. The woman sent a girl upstairs with us to show the room. There were 2 beds, a washstand, a clothes chest, and a big framed steel engraving of Nuestra Senora de Roncesvalles. The wind was blowing against the shutters. The room was on the north side of the inn. We washed, put on sweaters, and came downstairs into the dining room. It had a stone floor, low ceiling, and was oak paneled. The shutters were up, and it was so cold you could see your breath. "My God," said Bill, "it can't be this cold tomorrow. I'm not going to wade a stream in this weather." There was an upright piano in the far corner of the room, beyond the wooden tables, and Bill went over and started to play. "I got to keep warm," he said. I went out to find the woman and asked her how much the room and board was. She put her hands under her apron and looked away from me. 12 pesetas. "Why, we only paid that in Pamplona." She did not say anything, just took off her glasses and wiped them on her apron. "That's too much," I said. "We didn't pay more than that at a big hotel. We've put in a bathroom. Haven't you got anything cheaper?" "Not in the summer. Now is the big season." We were the only people in the inn. Well, I thought, it's only a few days. "Is the wine included?" "Oh, yes." "Well," I said, "it's all right." I went back to Bill. He blew his breath at me to show how cold it was, and went on playing. I sat at one of the tables and looked at the pictures on the wall. There was one panel of rabbits, dead, one of pheasants, also dead, and one panel of dead ducks. The panels were all dark and smoky looking. There was a cupboard full of liqueur bottles. I looked at them all. Bill was still playing. "How about a hot rum punch?" he said. "This isn't going to keep me warm permanently." I went out and told the woman what a rum punch was and how to make it. In a few minutes a girl brought a stone pitcher, steaming, into the room. Bill came over from the piano, and we drank the hot punch and listened to the wind. There isn't too much rum in that. I went over to the cupboard and brought the rum bottle and poured a half tumblerful into the pitcher. "Direct action," said Bill. "It beats legislation." The girl came in and laid the table for supper. "It blows like hell up here," Bill said. The girl brought in a big bowl of hot vegetable soup and the wine. We had fried trout afterward, and some sort of a stew, and a big bowl full of wild strawberries. We did not lose money on the wine, and the girl was shy but nice about bringing it. The old woman looked in once and counted the empty bottles. After supper we went upstairs and smoked and read in bed to keep warm. Once in the night I woke and heard the wind blowing. Felt good to be warm and in bed. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. When I woke in the morning, I went to the window and looked out. It had cleared, and there were no clouds on the mountains. Outside, under the window, were some carts and an old diligence. The wood of the roof cracked and split by the weather. It must have been left from the days before the motor buses. A goat hopped up on one of the carts, and then to the roof of the diligence. He jerked his head at the other goats below, and when I waved at him, he bounded down. Bill was still sleeping, so I dressed, put on my shoes outside in the hall, and went downstairs. No one was stirring downstairs, so I unbolted the door and went out. It was cool outside in the early morning, and the sun had not yet dried the dew that had come when the wind died down. I hunted around in the shed behind the inn, and found a sort of mattock, went down toward the stream to try and dig some worms for bait. The stream was clear and shallow, but it did not look trouty. On the grassy bank, where it was damp, I drove the mattock into the earth, and loosened a chunk of sod. There were worms underneath. They slid out of sight as I lifted the sod, and I dug carefully and got a good many. Digging at the edge of the damp ground, I filled 2 empty tobacco tins with worms and sifted dirt onto them. The goats watched me dig. When I went back into the inn, the woman was down in the kitchen, and I asked her to get coffee for us and that we wanted a lunch. Bill was awake and sitting on the edge of the bed. "I saw you out of the window," he said. "Didn't want to interrupt you. What were you doing? Bearing your money. You lazy bum. Been working for the common good? Splendid. I want you to do that every morning." "Come on," I said. "Get up." "What, get up? I never get up." He climbed into bed and pulled the sheet up to his chin. "Try and argue me into getting up." I went on looking for the tackle and putting it all together in the tackle bag. "Aren't you interested?" Bill asked. "I'm going down and eat." "Eat? Why didn't you say eat? I thought you just wanted me to get up for fun. Eat? Fine. Now you're reasonable. You go out and dig some more worms, and I'll be right down." "Oh, go to hell." "Work for the good of all." Bill stepped into his underclothes. "Show irony and pity." I started out of the room with the tackle bag, the nets, and the rod case. "Hey, come back." I put my head in the door. "Aren't you going to show a little irony and pity?" I thumbed my nose. "That's not irony." As I went downstairs, I heard Bill singing, "Irony and pity, when you're feeling. Oh, give them irony and give them pity. Oh, give them irony when they're feeling. Just a little irony, just a little pity." He kept on singing until he came downstairs. The tune was, "The bells are ringing for me and my gal." I was reading a week-old Spanish paper. "What's all this irony and pity?" "What? Don't you know about irony and pity?" "No. Who got it up?" "Everybody. They're mad about it in New York. It's just like the Fratellinis used to be." The girl came in with the coffee and buttered toast, or rather it was bread toasted and buttered. "Ask her if she's got any jam," Bill said. "Be ironical with her." "Have you got any jam?" "That's not ironical. I wish I could talk Spanish." The coffee was good, and we drank it out of big bowls. The girl brought in a glass dish of raspberry jam. "Thank you." "Hey, that's not the way," Bill said. "Say something ironical. Make some crack about Primo de Rivera." I could ask her what kind of jam they think they've gotten into in the riff. "Poor," said Bill, "very poor. You can't do it. That's all. You don't understand irony. You have no pity. Say something pitiful." "Robert Cohn." "Not so bad. That's better. Now why is Cohn pitiful? Be ironic." He took a big gulp of coffee. "Ah, hell," I said. "It's too early in the morning." "There you go. And you claim you want to be a writer, too. You're only a newspaper man. An expatriated newspaper man. You ought to be ironical the minute you get out of bed. You ought to wake up with your mouth full of pity." "Go on," I said. "Who did you get this stuff from?" "Everybody. Don't you read? Don't you ever see anybody? You know what you are. You're an expatriate. Why don't you live in New York? Then you'd know these things. What do you want me to do? Come over here and tell you every year?" "Take some more coffee," I said. "Good. Coffee is good for you. It's the caffeine in it." "Caffeine? We are here. Caffeine puts a man on her horse and a woman in his grave. You know what's the trouble with you? You're an expatriate. One of the worst type. Haven't you heard that? Nobody that ever left their own country ever wrote anything worth printing, not even in the newspapers." He drank the coffee. "You're an expatriate. You've lost touch with the soil. You get precious. Fake European standards have ruined you. You drink yourself to death. You've become obsessed by sex. You spend all your time talking, not working. You're an expatriate, see? You hang around cafes." "It sounds like a swell life," I said. "When do I work?" "You don't work. One group claims women support you. Another group claims you're impotent." "No," I said. "I just had an accident." "Never mention that," Bill said. "That's the sort of thing that can't be spoken of. That's what you ought to work up into a mystery, like Henry's bicycle." He had been going splendidly, but he stopped. I was afraid he thought he had hurt me with that crack about being impotent. I wanted to start him again. "It wasn't a bicycle," I said. "He was riding horseback. I heard it was a tricycle." "Well," I said, "a plane is sort of like a tricycle. The joystick works the same way. But you don't pedal it." "No," I said, "I guess you don't pedal it." "Let's lay off that," Bill said. "All right. I was just standing up for the tricycle." "I think he's a good rider, too," Bill said, "and you're a hell of a good guy. Anybody ever tell you you were a good guy?" "I'm not a good guy." "Listen, you're a hell of a good guy, and I'm fonder of you than anybody on earth. I couldn't tell you that in New York." "It mean I was a faggot. That was what the Civil War was about. Abraham Lincoln was a faggot. He was in love with General Grant. So was Jefferson Davis. Lincoln just freed the slaves on a bet. The Dred Scott case was framed by the Anti-Saloon League. Sex explains it all. The Colonel's lady and Judy O'Grady are lesbians under their skin." He stopped. "Want to hear some more?" "Shoot," I said. "I don't know any more. Tell you some more at lunch." "Old Bill," I said. "You bum." We packed the lunch and 2 bottles of wine in the rucksack, and Bill put it on. I carried the rod case and the landing net slung over my back. We started up the road and then went across a meadow, and found a path that crossed the fields and went toward the woods on the slope of the first hill. We walked across the fields on the sandy path. The fields were rolling and grassy, and the grass was short from the sheep grazing. The cattle were up in the hills. We heard their bells in the woods. The path crossed a stream on a foot log. The log was surfaced off, and there was a sapling bent across for a rail. In the flat pool beside the stream, tadpoles spotted the sand. We went up a steep bank and across the rolling fields. Looking back, we saw Brighette, white houses and red roofs, and the white road with the truck going along it, and the dust rising. Beyond the fields, we crossed another faster-flowing stream. A sandy road led down to the ford, and beyond into the woods. The path crossed the stream on another foot log below the ford, and joined the road, and we went into the woods. It was a beech wood, and the trees were very old. Their roots bulked above the ground, and the branches were twisted. We walked on the road between the thick trunks of the old beeches, and the sunlight came through the leaves in light patches on the grass. The trees were big, and the foliage was thick, but it was not gloomy. There was no undergrowth, only the smooth grass, very green and fresh, and the big gray trees well spaced as though it were a park. "This is country," Bill said. The road went up a hill, and we got into a thick woods, and the road kept on climbing. Sometimes it dipped down, but rose again steeply. All the time we heard the cattle in the woods. Finally, the road came out on the top of the hills. We were on the top of the height of the land that was the highest part of the range of wooded hills we had seen from Brighette. There were wild strawberries growing on the sunny side of the ridge in a little clearing in the trees. Ahead, the road came out of the forest and went along the shoulder of the ridge of hills. The hills ahead were not wooded, and there were great fields of yellow gorse. Way off we saw the steep bluffs, dark with trees and jutting with gray stone, that marked the course of the Irati River. "We have to follow this road along the ridge, cross these hills, go through the woods on the far hills, and come down to the Irati Valley," I pointed out to Bill. "That's a hell of a hike. It's too far to go and fish and come back the same day, comfortably." "Comfortably, that's a nice word. We'll have to go like hell to get there and back and have any fishing at all." It was a long walk, and the country was very fine, but we were tired when we came down the steep road that led out of the wooded hills into the valley of the Rio de la Fabrica. The road came out from the shadow of the woods into the hot sun. Ahead was a river valley. Beyond the river was a steep hill. There was a field of buckwheat on the hill. We saw a white house under some trees on the hillside. It was very hot, and we stopped under some trees beside a dam that crossed the river. Bill put the pack against one of the trees, and we jointed up the rods, put on the reels, tied on leaders, and got ready to fish. "You're sure this thing has trout in it?" Bill asked. "It's full of them." "I'm going to fish a fly. You got any McGinty's?" "There's some in there." "You going to fish bait?" "Yeah, I'm going to fish the dam here." "Well, I'll take the fly book, then." He tied on a fly. "Where'd I better go? Up or down?" "Down is the best. There're plenty up above, too." Bill went down the bank. "Take a worm can." "No, I don't want one. If they won't take a fly, I'll just flick it around." Bill was down below watching the stream. "Say," he called up against the noise of the dam, "how about putting the wine in that spring up the road?" "All right," I shouted. Bill waved his hand and started down the stream. I found the 2 wine bottles in the pack and carried them up the road to where the water of a spring flowed out of an iron pipe. There was a board over the spring, and I lifted it up and, knocking the corks firmly into the bottles, lowered them down into the water. It was so cold my hand and wrist felt numbed. I put back the slab of wood and hoped nobody would find the wine. I got my rod that was leaning against the tree, took the bait can and landing net, and walked out into the dam. It was built to provide a head of water for driving logs. The gate was up, and I sat on one of the square timbers and watched the smooth apron of water before the river tumbled into the falls. In the white water at the foot of the dam it was deep. As I baited up, a trout shot up out of the white water into the falls and was carried down. Before I could finish baiting, another trout jumped at the falls, making the same lovely arc, and disappearing into the water that was thundering down. I put on a good-sized sinker and dropped into the white water, close to the edge of the timbers of the dam. I did not feel the first trout strike. When I started to pull up, I felt that I had one and brought him, fighting and bending the rod almost double, out of the boiling water at the foot of the falls, and swung him up and onto the dam. He was a good trout, and I banged his head against the timber so that he quivered out straight, and then slipped him into my bag. While I had him on, several trout had jumped at the falls. As soon as I baited up and dropped in again, I hooked another, and brought him in the same way. In a little while I had 6. They were all about the same size. I laid them out side by side, all their heads pointing the same way, and looked at them. They were beautifully colored and firm and hard from the cold water. It was a hot day, so I split them all and shucked out the insides, gills and all, and tossed them over across the river. I took the trout ashore, washed them in the cold, smoothly heavy water above the dam, and then picked some ferns and packed them all in the bag, 3 trout on a layer of ferns, then another layer of ferns, then 3 more trout, and then covered them with ferns. They looked nice in the ferns, and now the bag was bulky, and I put it in the shade of the tree. It was very hot on the dam, so I put my worm can in the shade with the bag, got a book out of the pack, and settled down under the tree to read until Bill should come up for lunch. It was a little past noon, and there was not much shade, but I sat against the trunk of 2 of the trees that grew together and read. The book was something by A.E.W. Mason, and I was reading a wonderful story about a man who had been frozen in the Alps, and then fallen into a glacier and disappeared, and his bride was going to wait 24 years exactly for his body to come out on the moraine, while their true love waited too, and they were still waiting when Bill came up. "Get any?" he asked. He had his rod and his bag and his net all in one hand. He was sweating. I hadn't heard him come up, 'cause of the noise from the dam. "6. What did you get?" Bill sat down, opened his bag, laid out a big trout on the grass. He took up 3 more, each one a little bigger than the last, and laid them side by side in the shade from the tree. His face was sweaty and happy. "How are yours?" "Smaller." "Let's see them." "They're packed." "How big are they really?" "They're all about the size of your smallest." "You're not holding out on me." "I wish I were." "Get them all on worms?" "Yes." "You lazy bum." Bill put the trout in the bag and started for the river, swinging the open bag. He was wet from the waist down, and I knew he must have been wading the stream. I walked up the road and got out the 2 bottles of wine. They were cold. Moisture beaded on the bottles as I walked back to the trees. I spread the lunch on a newspaper, and uncorked one of the bottles and leaned the other against a tree. Bill came up drying his hands, his bag plump with ferns. "Let's see that bottle," he said. He pulled the cork and tipped up the bottle and drank. "Ooh, that makes my eyes ache. Let's try it." The wine was icy cold and tasted faintly rusty. "That's not such filthy wine," Bill said. "The cold helps it," I said. We unwrapped the little parcels of lunch. "Chicken. There's hard-boiled eggs. Find any salt?" "First the eggs," said Bill, "then the chicken. Even Brian could see that." "He's dead. I read it in the paper yesterday." "No, not really." "Yes, Brian's dead." Bill laid down the egg he was peeling. "Gentlemen," he said, and unwrapped a drumstick from a piece of newspaper. "I reverse the order, for Brian's sake, as a tribute to the great commoner. First the chicken, then the egg." "Wonder what day God created the chicken?" "Oh," said Bill, sucking the drumstick, "how should we know? We should not question. Our stay on earth is not for long. Let us rejoice, and believe, and give thanks." "Eat an egg." Bill gestured with the drumstick in one hand and the bottle of wine in the other. "Let us rejoice in our blessings. Let us utilize the fowls of the air. Let us utilize the product of the vine. Will you utilize a little, brother?" "After you, brother." Bill took a long drink. "Utilize a little, brother." He handed me the bottle. "Let us not doubt, brother. Let us not pry into the holy mysteries of the hen coop with simian fingers. Let us accept on faith and simply say, 'I want you to join with me in saying.' What shall we say, brother?" He pointed the drumstick at me and went on. "Let me tell you. We will say, and I for one am proud to say, and I want you to say with me, on your knees, brother, 'Let no man be ashamed to kneel here in the great out of doors. Remember the woods were God's first temples. Let us kneel and say, "Don't eat that, lady, that's Mencken."' Here," I said, "utilize a little of this." We uncorked the other bottle. "What's the matter?" I said. "Didn't you like Brian?" "I loved Brian," said Bill. "We were like brothers." "Where did you know him?" "He and Mencken and I went to Holy Cross together." "And Frankie Fritch?" "It's a lie. Frankie Fritch went to Fordham." "Well," I said, "I went to Loyola with Bishop Manning." "It's a lie," Bill said. "I went to Loyola with Bishop Manning myself." "You're cockeyed," I said. "On wine?" "Why not?" "It's the humidity," Bill said. "They ought to take this damn humidity away." "Have another shot." "Is this all we've got?" "Only the 2 bottles." "Do you know what you are?" Bill looked at the bottle affectionately. "No," I said. "You're in the pay of the Anti-Saloon League." "I went to Notre Dame with Wayne B. Wheeler." "It's a lie," said Bill. "I went to Austin Business College with Wayne B. Wheeler. He was class president." "Well," I said, "the saloon must go." "You're right there, old classmate," Bill said. "The saloon must go, and I will take it with me." "You're cockeyed." "On wine?" "On wine." "Well, maybe I am." "Want to take a nap?" "All right." We lay with our heads in the shade and looked up into the trees. "You asleep?" "No," Bill said. "I was thinking." I shut my eyes. It felt good lying on the ground. "Say," Bill said, "what about this Brett business?" "What about it?" "Were you ever in love with her?" "Sure." "For how long?" "Off and on for a hell of a long time." "Oh, hell," Bill said. "I'm sorry, fella." "It's all right," I said. "I don't give a damn any more." "Really?" "Really. Only I'd a hell of a lot rather not talk about it." "You aren't sore I asked you?" "Why the hell should I be?" "I'm going to sleep," Bill said. He put a newspaper over his face. "Listen, Jake," he said. "Are you really a Catholic?" "Technically." "What does that mean?" "I don't know." "All right, I'll go to sleep now," he said. "Don't keep me awake by talking too much." I went to sleep too. When I woke up, Bill was packing the rucksack. It was late in the afternoon, and the shadow from the trees was long and went out over the dam. I was stiff from sleeping on the ground. "What did you do? Wake up?" Bill asked. "Why didn't you spend the night?" I stretched and rubbed my eyes. "I had a lovely dream," Bill said. "I don't remember what it was about, but it was a lovely dream. I don't think I dreamt." "You ought to dream," Bill said. "All our biggest businessmen have been dreamers. Look at Ford. Look at President Coolidge. Look at Rockefeller. Look at Joe Davidson." I disjointed my rod and Bill's and packed them in the rod case. I put the reels in the tackle bag. Bill had packed the rucksack, and we put one of the trout bags in. I carried the other. "Well," said Bill, "have we got everything?" "The worms." "Your worms. Put them in there." He had the pack on his back, and I put the worm cans in one of the outside flap pockets. "You got everything now?" I looked around on the grass at the foot of the elm trees. "Yes." We started up the road into the woods. It was a long walk home to Brigitte, and it was dark when we came down across the fields to the road, and along the road between the houses of the town, their windows lighted, to the inn. We stayed 5 days at Brigitte and had good fishing. The nights were cold and the days were hot. There was always a breeze even in the heat of the day. It was hot enough so that it felt good to wade in a cold stream, and the sun dried you when you came out and sat on the bank. We found a stream with a pool deep enough to swim in. In the evenings we played three-handed bridge with an Englishman named Harris, who had walked over from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and was stopping at the inn for the fishing. He was very pleasant, went with us twice to the Irati River. There was no word from Robert Cohn, nor from Brett and Mike. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. One morning I went down to breakfast, and the Englishman, Harris, was already at the table. He was reading the paper through his spectacles. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Letter for you. I stopped at the post, and they gave it to me with mine." The letter was at my place at the table, leaning against a coffee cup. Harris was reading the paper again. I opened the letter. It had been forwarded from Pamplona. It was dated San Sebastian, Sunday. "Dear Jake, we got here Friday. Brett passed out on the train, so brought her here for 3 days' rest with old friends of ours. We go to Montoya Hotel, Pamplona, Tuesday, arriving at I don't know what hour. Will you send a note by the bus to tell us what to do to rejoin you all on Wednesday? All our love, and sorry to be late, but Brett was really done in, and will be quite all right by Tuesday, and is practically so now. I know her so well, and try to look after her, but it's not so easy. Love to all the chaps. Michael." "What day of the week is it?" I asked Harris. "Wednesday, I think. Yes, quite Wednesday. Wonderful how one loses track of the days up here in the mountains." "Yes, we've been here nearly a week." "I hope you're not thinking of leaving." "Yes, we'll go in on the afternoon bus, I'm afraid." "What a rotten business. I had hoped we'd all have another go at the Irati together." "We have to go into Pamplona. We're meeting people there." "What rotten luck for me. We've had a jolly time here at Brigitte. Come on in to Pamplona. We can play some bridge there. And there's going to be a damned fine fiesta." "I'd like to. Awfully nice of you to ask me. I'd best stop on here, though. I've not much more time to fish." "You want those big ones in the Irati?" "I say I do, you know. They're enormous trout there." "I'd like to try them once more." "Do stop over another day. Be a good chap." "We really have to get into town," I said. "What a pity." After breakfast, Bill and I were sitting warming in the sun on a bench out in front of the inn and talking it over. I saw a girl coming up the road from the center of the town. She stopped in front of us and took a telegram out of the leather wallet that hung against her skirt. "Por ustedes." I looked at it. The address was Barnes, Brigitte. "Yes, it's for us." She brought out a book for me to sign, and I gave her a couple of coppers. The telegram was in Spanish. "Vengo jueves, Cohn." I handed it to Bill. "What does the word Cohn mean?" he asked. "What a lousy telegram," I said. "He could send 10 words for the same price. I come Thursday." That gives you a lot of dope, doesn't it?" "It gives you all the dope that's of interest to Cohn." "We're going in anyway," I said. "There's no use trying to move Brett and Mike out here and back before the fiesta. Should we answer it?" "We might as well," said Bill. "There's no need for us to be snooty." We walked up to the post office and asked for a telegraph blank. "What will we say?" Bill asked. "Arriving tonight." "That's enough." We paid for the message and walked back to the inn. Harris was there, and the three of us walked up to Roncesvalles. We went through the monastery. "It's a remarkable place," Harris said, when we came out. "But, you know, I'm not much on those sort of places." "Me either," Bill said. "It's a remarkable place, though," Harris said. "I wouldn't not have seen it. I've been intending coming up each day." "It isn't the same as fishing, though, is it?" Bill asked. He liked Harris. "I say not." We were standing in front of the old chapel of the monastery. "Isn't that a pub across the way?" Harris asked. "Or do my eyes deceive me?" "It has the look of a pub," Bill said. "It looks to me like a pub," I said. "I say," said Harris, "let's utilize it." He'd taken up utilizing from Bill. We had a bottle of wine apiece. Harris would not let us pay. He talked Spanish quite well, and the innkeeper would not take our money. "I say, you don't know what it's meant to me to have you chaps up here. We've had a grand time, Harris." Harris was a little tight. "I say, really, you don't know how much it means. I've not had much fun since the war." "We'll fish together again, sometime. Don't you forget it, Harris." "We must. We have had such a jolly good time." "How about another bottle around?" "Jolly good idea," said Harris. "This is mine," said Bill, "or we don't drink it." "I wish you'd let me pay for it. It does give me pleasure, you know." "This is going to give me pleasure," Bill said. The innkeeper brought in the fourth bottle. We kept the same glasses. Harris lifted his glass. "I say, you know this does utilize well." Bill slapped him on the back. "Good old Harris." "I say, you know, my name isn't really Harris. It's Wilson Harris. All one name, with a hyphen, you know." "Good old Wilson Harris," Bill said. "We call you Harris because we're so fond of you." "I say, Barnes, you don't know what this all means to me." "Come on and utilize another glass," I said. "Barnes, really, Barnes, you can't know. That's all. Drink up, Harris." We walked back down the road from Roncesvalles, with Harris between us. We had lunch at the inn, and Harris went with us to the bus. He gave us his card, with his address in London and his club and his business address, and as we got on the bus he handed us each an envelope. I opened mine, and there were a dozen flies in it. Harris had tied them himself. He tied all his own flies. "I say, Harris," I began. No, he said. He was climbing down from the bus. "They're not first-rate flies at all. I only thought if you fished them sometime it might remind you of what a good time we had." The bus started. Harris stood in front of the post office. He waved. As we started along the road he turned and walked back toward the inn. "Say, wasn't that Harris nice?" Bill said. "I think he really did have a good time." "Harris? You bet he did. I wish he'd come into Pamplona." "You wanted to fish?" "Yes. You couldn't tell how English would mix with each other anyway." "I suppose not." We got into Pamplona late in the afternoon, and the bus stopped in front of the Hotel Montoya. Out in the plaza they were stringing electric light wires to light the plaza for the fiesta. A few kids came up when the bus stopped, and a custom officer for the town made all the people getting down from the bus open their bundles on the sidewalk. We went into the hotel, and on the stairs I met Montoya. He shook hands with us, smiling in his embarrassed way. "Your friends are here," he said. "Mr. Campbell." "Yes, Mr. Cohn and Mr. Campbell and Lady Ashley." He smiled as though there was something I would hear about. "When did they get in?" "Yesterday. I saved you the rooms you had." "That's fine. Did you give Mr. Campbell the room on the plaza?" "Yes, all the rooms we looked at." "Where are our friends now?" "I think they went to the pelota." "And how about the bulls?" Montoya smiled. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight at 7 o'clock they bring in the Villar bulls, and tomorrow come the Miuras." "Do you all go down?" Oh, yes, they've never seen a desencajonada. Montoya put his hand on my shoulder. I'll see you there. He smiled again. He always smiled as though bullfighting were a very special secret between the two of us. A rather shocking but really very deep secret that we knew about. He always smiled as though there were something lewd about the secret to outsiders, but that it was something that we understood. It would not do to expose it to people who would not understand. Your friend, is he aficionado, too? Montoya smiled at Bill. Yes, he came all the way from New York to see the San Fermines. Yes? Montoya politely disbelieved. But he's not aficionado like you. He put his hand on my shoulder again, embarrassedly. Yes, I said, he's a real aficionado. But he's not aficionado like you are. Afición means passion. An aficionado is one who is passionate about the bullfights. All the good bullfighters stayed at Montoya's hotel. That is, those with afición stayed there. The commercial bullfighters stayed once, perhaps, and then did not come back. The good ones came each year. In Montoya's room were their photographs. The photographs were dedicated to Juanito Montoya, or to his sister. The photographs of bullfighters Montoya had really believed in were framed. Photographs of bullfighters who had been without afición Montoya kept in a drawer of his desk. They often had the most flattering inscriptions, but they did not mean anything. One day Montoya took them all out and dropped them in the wastebasket. He did not want them around. We often talked about bulls and bullfighters. I had stopped at the Montoya for several years. We never talked for very long at a time. It was simply the pleasure of discovering what we each felt. Men would come in from distant towns, and before they left Pamplona, stop and talk for a few minutes with Montoya about bulls. These men were aficionados. Those who were aficionados could always get rooms, even when the hotel was full. Montoya introduced me to some of them. They were always very polite at first, and it amused them very much that I should be an American. Somehow it was taken for granted that an American could not have afición. He might simulate it or confuse it with excitement, but he could not really have it. When they saw that I had afición, and there was no password, no set questions that could bring it out, rather it was a sort of oral spiritual examination with the questions always a little on the defensive and never apparent. There was the same embarrassed putting the hand on the shoulder, or a buen hombre. But nearly always there was the actual touching. It seemed as though they wanted to touch you, to make it certain. Montoya could forgive anything of a bullfighter who had afición. He could forgive attacks of nerves, panic, bad unexplainable actions, all sorts of lapses. For one who had afición he could forgive anything. At once he forgave me all my friends. Without his ever saying anything, they were simply a little something shameful between us, like the spilling open of the horses in bullfighting. Bill had gone upstairs as we came in, and I found him washing and changing in his room. Well, he said, talk a lot of Spanish. He was telling me about the bulls coming in tonight. Let's find the gang and go down. All right, they'll probably be at the cafe. Have you got tickets? Yes, I got them for all the unloadings. What's it like? He was pulling his cheek before the glass, looking to see if there were unshaved patches under the line of the jaw. It's pretty good, I said. They let the bulls out of the cages one at a time, and they have steers in the corral to receive them and keep them from fighting. And the bulls tear in at the steers, and the steers run around like old maids trying to quiet them down. Do they ever gore the steers? Sure, sometimes they go right after them and kill them. Can't the steers do anything? No, they're trying to make friends. What do they have them in for? To quiet down the bulls and keep them from breaking their horns against the stone walls or goring each other. Must be swell being a steer. We went down the stairs and out of the door and walked across the square toward the Café Iruña. There were two lonely-looking ticket houses standing in the square. Their windows marked Sol, Sol y Sombra, and Sombra were shut. They would not open until the day before the fiesta. Across the square, the white wicker tables and chairs of the Iruña extended out beyond the arcade to the edge of the street. I looked for Brett and Mike at the tables. They were there, Brett and Mike and Robert Cohn. Brett was wearing a Basque beret. So was Mike. Robert Cohn was bareheaded and wearing his spectacles. Brett saw us coming and waved. Her eyes crinkled up as we came to the table. "Hello, you chaps," she called. Brett was happy. Mike had a way of getting an intensity of feeling into shaking hands. Robert Cohn shook hands because we were back. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked. "I brought them up here," Cohn said. "What rot," Brett said. "We'd have gotten here earlier if you hadn't come." "You'd never have gotten here." "What rot! You chaps are brown. Look at Bill." "Did you get good fishing?" Mike asked. "We wanted to join you." "Wasn't bad. We missed you." "I wanted to come," Cohn said, "but I thought I ought to bring them." "You bring us? What rot!" "Was it really good?" Mike asked. "Did you take many?" "Some days we took a dozen apiece. There was an Englishman up there." "Named Harris," Bill said. "Ever know him, Mike? He was in the war, too." "Fortunate fellow," Mike said. "What times we had." "How I wish those dear days were back." "Don't be an ass." "Were you in the war, Mike?" Cohn asked. "Was I not?" "He was a very distinguished soldier," Brett said. "Tell them about the time your horse bolted down Piccadilly." "I'll not. I've told that 4 times." "You never told me," Robert Cohn said. "I'll not tell that story. It reflects discredit on me." "Tell them about your medals." "I'll not. That story reflects great discredit on me." "What story's that?" "Brett will tell you. She tells all the stories that reflect discredit on me." "Go on, tell it, Brett." "Should I? I'll tell it myself." "What medals have you got, Mike?" "I haven't got any medals." "You must have some." "I suppose I've the usual medals, but I never sent in for them. One time there was this whopping big dinner, and the Prince of Wales was to be there, and the card said medals will be worn. So naturally I had no medals, and I stopped at my tailor's, and he was impressed by the invitation. And I thought that's a good piece of business, and I said to him, 'You've got to fix me up with some medals.' He said, 'What medals, sir?' And I said, 'Oh, any medals, just give me a few medals.' So he said, 'What medals have you, sir?' And I said, 'How should I know?' Did he think I spent all my time reading the bloody Gazette? Just give me a good lot. Pick them out yourself.' So he got me some medals, miniature medals, and handed me the box. And I put it in my pocket and forgot it. Well, I went to the dinner, and it was the night they'd shot Henry Wilson, so the prince didn't come, and the king didn't come, and no one wore any medals, and all these coves were busy taking off their medals, and I had mine in my pocket." He stopped for us to laugh. "Is that all?" "That's all. Perhaps I didn't tell it right." "You didn't," said Brett, "but no matter." We were all laughing. "Ah, yes," said Mike, "I know now. It was a damned dull dinner, and I couldn't stick it, so I left. Later on in the evening I found the box in my pocket. 'What's this?' I said. 'Medals. Bloody military medals?' So I cut them all off their backing. They put them on a strip, and gave them all around. Gave one to each girl. Form of souvenir. They thought I was hell's own shakes of a soldier. Give away medals in a nightclub. Dashing fellow." "Tell the rest," Brett said. "Don't you think that was funny?" Mike asked. We were all laughing. It was. I swear it was. Any rate, my tailor wrote me and wanted the medals back. Sent a man around. Kept on writing for months. Seems some chap had left them to be cleaned. Frightfully military cove. Set hell's own store by them." Mike paused. "Rotten luck for the tailor," he said. "You don't mean it," Bill said. "I should think it would have been grand for the tailor." "Frightfully good tailor. Never believe it to see me now," Mike said. "I used to pay him £100 a year just to keep him quiet, so he wouldn't send me any bills. Frightful blow to him when I went bankrupt. Was right after the medals. Gave his letters rather a bitter tone." "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "2 ways," Mike said. "Gradually, and then suddenly." "What brought it on?" "Friends," said Mike. "I had a lot of friends. False friends. And I had creditors, too. Probably had more creditors than anybody in England." "Tell them about in the court," Brett said. "I don't remember," Mike said. "I was just a little tight." "Tight?" Brett exclaimed. "You were blind." "Extraordinary thing," Mike said. "Met my former partner the other day. Offered to buy me a drink." "Tell them about your learned counsel," Brett said. "I will not," Mike said. "My learned counsel was blind, too. I say, this is a gloomy subject. Are we going down and see these bulls unloaded or not?" "Let's go down." We called the waiter, paid, and started to walk through the town. I started off walking with Brett, but Robert Cohn came up and joined her on the other side. The three of us walked along, past the ayuntamiento, with the banners hung from the balcony, down past the market, and down past the steep street that led to the bridge across the Arga. There were many people walking to go and see the bulls, and carriages drove down the hill and across the bridge, the drivers, the horses, and the whips rising above the walking people in the street. Across the bridge we turned up a road to the corrals. We passed a wine shop with a sign in the window, "Good wine, 30 centimes a liter." "That's where we'll go when funds get low," Brett said. The woman standing in the door of the wine shop looked at us as we passed. She called into someone in the house, and 3 girls came to the window and stared. They were staring at Brett. At the gate of the corrals, 2 men took tickets from the people that went in. We went in through the gate. There were trees inside and a low stone house. At the far end was the stone wall of the corrals, with apertures in the stone that were like loopholes running all along the face of each corral. A ladder led up to the top of the wall, and people were climbing up the ladder and spreading down to stand on the walls that separated the 2 corrals. As we came up the ladder, walking across the grass under the trees, we passed the big gray painted cages with the bulls in them. There was 1 bull in each traveling box. They had come by train from a bull breeding ranch in Castile, and had been unloaded off flat cars at the station and brought up here to be let out of their cages into the corrals. Each cage was stenciled with the name and the brand of the bull breeder. We climbed up and found a place on the wall looking down into the corral. The stone walls were whitewashed, and there was straw on the ground and wooden feed boxes and water troughs set against the wall. "Look up there," I said. Beyond the river rose the plateau of the town. All along the old walls and ramparts people were standing. The 3 lines of fortifications made 3 black lines of people. Above the walls there were heads in the windows of the houses. At the far end of the plateau, boys had climbed into the trees. "They must think something is going to happen," Brett said. "They want to see the bulls." Mike and Bill were on the other wall across the pit of the corral. They waved to us. People who'd come late were standing behind us, pressing against us when other people crowded them. "Why don't they start?" Robert Cohn asked. A single mule was hitched to one of the cages and dragged it up against the gate in the corral wall. The men shoved and lifted it with crowbars into position against the gate. Men were standing on the wall ready to pull up the gate of the corral, and then the gate of the cage. The other end of the corral, a gate opened, and 2 steers came in, swaying their heads and trotting, their lean flanks swinging. They stood together at the far end, their heads toward the gate where the bull would enter. "They don't look happy," Brett said. The men on top of the wall leaned back and pulled up the door of the corral. Then they pulled up the door of the cage. I leaned way over the wall and tried to see into the cage. It was dark. Someone rapped on the cage with an iron bar. Inside something seemed to explode. The bull, striking into the wood from side to side with his horns, made a great noise. Then I saw a dark muzzle and the shadow of horns, and then, with a clattering on the wood in the hollow box, the bull charged and came out into the corral, skidding with his forefeet in the straw as he stopped, his head up, the great hump of muscle on his neck swollen tight, his body muscles quivering as he looked up at the crowd on the stone walls. The 2 steers backed away against the wall, their heads sunken, their eyes watching the bull. The bull saw them and charged. A man shouted from behind one of the boxes and slapped his hat against the planks, and the bull, before he reached the steer, turned, gathered himself, and charged where the man had been, trying to reach him behind the planks with a half-dozen quick, searching drives with the right horn. "My God, isn't he beautiful?" Brett said. "We were looking right down on him." "Look how he knows how to use his horns," I said. "He's got a left and a right, just like a boxer." "Not really." "You watch. It goes too fast. Wait, there'll be another one in a minute." They had backed up another cage into the entrance. In the far corner, a man, from behind one of the plank shelters, attracted the bull, and while the bull was facing away, the gate was pulled up, and a second bull came out into the corral. He charged straight for the steers, and 2 men ran out from behind the planks and shouted to turn him. He did not change his direction, and the men shouted, "Ha! Ha! Toro!" and waved their arms. The 2 steers turned sideways to take the shock, and the bull drove into one of the steers. "Don't look," I said to Brett. She was watching, fascinated. "Fine," I said, "if it doesn't buck you." "I saw it," she said. "I saw him shift from his left to his right horn." "Damn good." The steer was down now, his neck stretched out, his head twisted. He lay the way he had fallen. Suddenly the bull left off and made for the other steer, which had been standing at the far end, his head swinging, watching it all. The steer ran awkwardly, and the bull caught him, hooked him lightly in the flank, and then turned away and looked up at the crowd on the walls, his crest of muscle rising. The steer came up to him and made as though to nose at him, and the bull hooked, perfunctorily. The next time he nosed at the steer, and then the 2 of them trotted over to the other bull. When the next bull came out, all 3, the 2 bulls and the steer, stood together, their heads side by side, their horns against the newcomer. In a few minutes the steer picked the new bull up, quieted him down, and made him one of the herd. When the last 2 bulls had been unloaded, the herd were all together. The steer who had been gored had gotten to his feet and stood against the stone wall. None of the bulls came near him, and he did not attempt to join the herd. We climbed down from the wall with the crowd, and had a last look at the bulls through the loopholes in the wall of the corral. They were all quiet now, their heads down. We got a carriage outside and rode up to the cafe. Mike and Bill came in half an hour later. They had stopped on the way for several drinks. We were sitting in the cafe. "That's an extraordinary business," Brett said. "Will those last ones fight as well as the first?" Robert Cohn asked. "They seem to quiet down awfully fast." "They all know each other," I said. "They're only dangerous when they're alone, or only 2 or 3 of them together." "What do you mean, dangerous?" Bill said. "They all look dangerous to me." "They only want to kill when they're alone. Of course, if you went in there, you'd probably detach one of them from the herd, and he'd be dangerous." "That's too complicated," Bill said. "Don't you ever detach me from the herd, Mike." "I say," Mike said, "they were fine bulls, weren't they? Did you see their horns?" "Did I not?" said Brett. "I had no idea what they were like." "Did you see the one hit that steer?" Mike asked. "That was extraordinary." "It's no life being a steer," Robert Cohn said. "Don't you think so?" Mike said. "I would have thought you'd love being a steer, Robert." "What do you mean, Mike?" "They lead such a quiet life. They never say anything, and they're always hanging about so." We were embarrassed. Bill laughed. Robert Cohn was angry. Mike went on talking. "I should think you'd love it. You never have to say a word. Come on, Robert, do say something. Don't just sit there." "I said something, Mike. Don't you remember? About the steers." "Oh, say something more. Say something funny. Can't you see we're all having a good time here?" "Come off it, Michael. You're drunk," Brett said. "I'm not drunk. I'm quite serious. Is Robert Cohn going to follow Brett around like a steer all the time?" "Shut up, Michael. Try and show a little breeding." "Breeding be damned. Who is any breeding, anyway, except the bulls?" "Aren't the bulls lovely? Don't you like them, Bill? Why don't you say something, Robert? Don't sit there looking like a bloody funeral. What if Brett did sleep with you? She slept with lots of better people than you." "Shut up," Cohn said. He stood up. "Shut up, Mike." "Oh, don't stand up and act as though you were going to hit me. That won't make any difference to me. Tell me, Robert, why do you follow Brett around like a poor bloody steer? Don't you know you're not wanted?" "I know when I'm not wanted. Why don't you know when you're not wanted? You came down to San Sebastian where you weren't wanted and followed Brett around like a bloody steer. Do you think that's right?" "Shut up. You're drunk." "Perhaps I am drunk. Why aren't you drunk? Why don't you ever get drunk, Robert? You know you didn't have a good time at San Sebastian because none of our friends would invite you on any of the parties. You can't blame them hardly, can you? I asked them to. They wouldn't do it. You can't blame them now, can you? Now answer me. Can you blame them?" "Go to hell, Mike. I can't blame them. Can you blame them? Why do you follow Brett around? Haven't you any manners? How do you think it makes me feel?" You're a splendid one to talk about manners, Brett said. You've such lovely manners. Come on, Robert, Bill said. What do you follow her around for? Bill stood up and took hold of Cohn. Don't go, Mike said. Robert Cohn's going to buy a drink. Bill went off with Cohn. Cohn's face was sallow. Mike went on talking. I sat and listened for a while. Brett looked disgusted. I say, Michael, you might not be such a bloody ass, she interrupted. I'm not saying he's not right, you know. She turned to me. The emotion left Mike's voice. We were all friends together. I'm not so damn drunk as I sounded, he said. I know you're not, Brett said. We're none of us sober, I said. I didn't say anything I didn't mean. But you put it so badly, Brett laughed. He was an ass, though. He came down to San Sebastian, where he damn well wasn't wanted. He hung around Brett and just looked at her. It made me damn well sick. He did behave very badly, Brett said. Mark you, Brett's had affairs with men before. She tells me all about everything. She gave me this chap Cohn's letters to read. I wouldn't read them. Damn noble of you. No, listen, Jake. Brett's gone off with men, but they weren't ever Jews, and they didn't come and hang about afterwards. Damn good chaps, Brett said. It's all right to talk about it. Michael and I understand each other. She gave me Robert Cohn's letters. I wouldn't read them. You wouldn't read any letters, darling. You wouldn't read mine. I can't read letters, Mike said. Funny, isn't it? You can't read anything. No, you're wrong there. I read quite a bit. I read when I'm at home. You'll be writing next, Brett said. Come on, Michael, do buck up. You've got to go through with this thing now. He's here. Don't spoil the fiesta. Well, let him behave, then. He'll behave. I'll tell him. You tell him, Jake. Tell him either he must behave or get out. Yes, I said, it would be nice for me to tell him. Look, Brett, tell Jake what Robert calls you. That is perfect, you know. Oh, no, I can't. Go on, we're all friends. Aren't we all friends, Jake? I can't tell him. It's too ridiculous. I'll tell him. You won't, Michael. Don't be an ass. He calls her Circe. Mike said he claims she turns men into swine. Damn good. I wish I were one of these literary chaps. He'd be good, you know, Brett said. He writes a good letter. I know, I said. He wrote me from San Sebastian. That was nothing, Brett said. He can write a damned amusing letter. She made me write that. She was supposed to be ill. I damned well was, too. Come on, I said. We must go in and eat. How should I meet Cohn, Mike said. Just act as though nothing had happened. It's quite all right with me, Mike said. I'm not embarrassed. If he says anything, just say you were tight. Quite. And the funny thing is I think I was tight. Come on, Brett said. Are these poisonous things paid for? I must bathe before dinner. We walked across the square. It was dark, and all around the square were the lights from the cafes under the arcades. We walked across the gravel under the trees to the hotel. They went upstairs, and I stopped to speak with Montoya. Well, how did you like the bulls? He asked. Good. They were nice bulls. They're all right. Montoya shook his head, but they're not too good. What didn't you like about them? I don't know. They just didn't give me the feeling that they were so good. I know what you mean. They're all right. Yes, they're all right. How did your friends like them? Fine. Good, Montoya said. I went upstairs. Bill was in his room standing on the balcony looking out at the square. I stood beside him. Where's Cohn? Upstairs, in his room. How does he feel? Like hell, naturally. Mike was awful. He's terrible when he's tight. He wasn't so tight. The hell he wasn't. I know what we had before we came to the cafe. He sobered up afterward. Good. He was terrible. I don't like Cohn, God knows, and I think it was a silly trick for him to go down to San Sebastian, but nobody has any business to talk like Mike. How'd you like the bulls? Grand. It's grand the way they bring them out. Tomorrow come the Miuras. When does the fiesta start? Day after tomorrow. We've got to keep Mike from getting so tight. That kind of stuff is terrible. We'd better get cleaned up for supper. Yes, that will be a pleasant meal. Won't it? As a matter of fact, supper was a pleasant meal. Brett wore a black sleeveless evening gown. She looked quite beautiful. Mike acted as though nothing had happened. I had to go up and bring Robert Cohn down. He was reserved and formal, and his face was still taut and sallow, but he cheered up finely. Could not stop looking at Brett. It seemed to make him happy. Must have been pleasant for him to see her looking so lovely, and know he had been away with her and that everyone knew it. They could not take that away from him. Bill was very funny, so was Michael. They were good together. It was like certain dinners I remember from the war. There was much wine, and ignored tension, and a feeling of things coming that you could not prevent happening. Under the wine I lost the disgusted feeling, and was happy. It seemed they were all such nice people. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. I do not know what time I got to bed. I remember undressing, putting on a bathrobe, and standing out on the balcony. I knew I was quite drunk, and when I came in I put on the light over the head of the bed and started to read. I was reading a book by Turgenev. Probably I read the same 2 pages over several times. It was one of the stories in a sportsman's sketches. I had read it before, but it seemed quite new. The country became very clear, and the feeling of pressure in my head seemed to loosen. I was very drunk, and I did not want to shut my eyes, because the room would go round and round. If I kept on reading, that feeling would pass. I heard Brett and Robert Cohn come up the stairs. Cohn said good night outside the door and went on up to his room. I heard Brett go into the room next door. Mike was already in bed. He had come in with me an hour before. He woke as she came in, and they talked together. I heard them laugh. I turned off the light and tried to go to sleep. It was not necessary to read any more. I could shut my eyes without getting the wheeling sensation. But I could not sleep. There's no reason why, because it is dark, you should look at things differently from when it is light. The hell it isn't. I figured that all out once, and for 6 months I never slept with the electric light off. That was another bright idea. To hell with women, anyway. To hell with you, Brett Ashley. Women make such swell friends. Awfully swell. In the first place, you had to be in love with a woman to have a basis of friendship. I'd been having Brett for a friend. I had not been thinking about her side of it. I had been getting something for nothing. That only delayed the presentation of the bill. The bill always came. That was one of the swell things you could count on. I thought I had paid for everything, not like the woman pays and pays and pays. No idea of retribution or punishment. Just exchange of values. You gave up something and got something else, or you worked for something. You paid some way for everything that was any good. I paid my way into enough things that I liked so that I had a good time. Either you paid by learning about them, or by experience, or by taking chances, or by money. Enjoying living was learning to get your money's worth, and knowing when you had it, you could get your money's worth. The world was a good place to buy in. It seemed like a fine philosophy. In 5 years, I thought, it will seem just as silly as all the other fine philosophies I've had. Perhaps that wasn't true, though. Perhaps as you went along you did learn something. I did not care what it was all about. All I wanted to know was how to live in it. Maybe if you found out how to live in it, you learned from that what it was all about. I wished Mike would not behave so terribly to Cohn, though. Mike was a bad drunk. Brett was a good drunk. Bill was a good drunk. Cohn was never drunk. Mike was unpleasant after he passed a certain point. I liked to see him hurt Cohn. I wished he would not do it, though, because afterward it made me disgusted of myself. That was morality, things that made you disgusted afterward. No, that must be immorality. That was a large statement. What a lot of bilge I could think up at night. What rot! I could hear Brett say it. What rot! When you were with English, you got into the habit of using English expressions in your thinking. The English spoken language, the upper classes anyway, must have fewer words than the Eskimo. Of course I didn't know anything about the Eskimo. Maybe the Eskimo was a fine language. Say the Cherokee. I didn't know anything about the Cherokee either. The English talked with inflected phrases, one phrase to mean everything. I liked them, though. I liked the way they talked. Take Harris. Still, Harris was not the upper classes. I turned on the light again and read. I read the Turgenev. I knew that now, reading it in the oversensitized state of mind after much too much brandy, I would remember it somewhere, and afterward it would seem as though it really happened to me. I would always have it. That was another good thing you paid for and then had. Sometime along toward daylight, I went to sleep. The next 2 days in Pamplona were quiet, and there were no more rows. The town was getting ready for the fiesta. Workmen put up the gate-posts that were to shut off the side streets when the bulls were released from the corrals and came running through the streets in the morning on their way to the ring. The workmen dug holes and fitted in the timbers, each timber numbered for its regular place. Out on the plateau beyond the town, employees of the bull ring exercised picador horses, galloping them stiff-legged on the hard sun-baked fields behind the bull ring. The big gate of the bull ring was open, and inside, the amphitheater was being swept. The ring was rolled and sprinkled, and carpenters replaced weakened or cracked planks in the barrera. Standing at the edge of the smooth-rolled sand, you could look up into the empty stands and see old women sweeping out the boxes. Outside, the fence that led from the last street of the town to the entrance of the bull ring was already in place and made a long pen. The crowd would come running down with the bulls behind them on the morning of the day of the first bullfight. Out across the plain, where the horse and cattle fair would be, some gypsies had camped under the trees. The wine and aguardiente sellers were putting up their booths. One booth advertised Anis del Toro. The cloth sign hung against the planks in the hot sun. In the big square that was the center of the town, there was no change yet. We sat in the white wicker chairs on the terrace of the cafe and watched the motor buses come in and unload peasants from the country coming into the market. We watched the buses fill up and start out with peasants sitting with their saddlebags full of the things they had bought in town. The tall gray motor buses were the only life of the square, except for the pigeons and the man with a hose who sprinkled the gravelled square and watered the streets. In the evening was the paseo. For an hour after dinner, everyone, all the good-looking girls, the officers from the garrison, all the fashionable people of the town, walked in the street on one side of the square, while the cafe tables filled with the regular after-dinner crowd. During the morning I usually sat in the cafe and read the Madrid papers and then walked in the town or out into the country. Sometimes Bill went along. Sometimes he wrote in his room. Robert Cohn spent the mornings studying Spanish or trying to get a shave at the barber shop. Brett and Mike never got up until noon. We all had a vermouth at the cafe. It was a quiet life, and no one was drunk. I went to church a couple of times, once with Brett. She said she wanted to hear me go to confession. But I told her not only was it impossible, but it was not as interesting as it sounded. Besides, it would be in a language she did not know. We met Cohn as we came out of the church, and although it was obvious he had followed us, yet he was very pleasant and nice, and we all three went for a walk out to the gypsy camp, and Brett had her fortune told. It was a good morning. There were high white clouds above the mountains. It had rained a little in the night, and it was fresh and cool on the plateau, and there was a wonderful view. We all felt good, and we felt healthy, and I felt quite friendly to Cohn. We could not be upset about anything on a day like that. That was the last day before the fiesta. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. At noon of Sunday, the 6th of July, the fiesta exploded. There is no other way to describe it. People had been coming in all day from the country, but they were assimilated in the town, and you did not notice them. The square was as quiet in the hot sun as on any other day. The peasants were in the outlying wine shops. There they were drinking, getting ready for the fiesta. They had come in so recently from the plains and the hills that it was necessary that they make their shifting in values gradually. They could not start in paying café prices. They got their money's worth in the wine shops. Money still had a definite value in hours worked and bushels of grain sold. Late in the fiesta it would not matter what they paid, nor where they bought. Now, on the day of the starting of the fiesta of San Fermin, they had been in the wine shops of the narrow streets of the town since early morning. Going down the streets in the morning on the way to Mass in the cathedral, I heard them singing through the open doors of the shops. They were warming up. There were many people at the 11 o'clock Mass. San Fermin is also a religious festival. I walked down the hill from the cathedral and up the street to the café on the square. It was a little before noon. Robert Cohn and Bill were sitting at one of the tables. The marble-topped tables and the white wicker chairs were gone. They were replaced by cast-iron tables and severe folding chairs. The café was like a battleship, stripped for action. Today the waiters did not leave you alone all morning to read without asking if you wanted to order something. A waiter came up as soon as I sat down. "What are you drinking?" I asked Bill and Robert. "Sherry," Cohn said. "Sherries," I said to the waiter. Before the waiter brought the sherry, the rocket that announced the fiesta went up in the square. It burst, and there was a grey ball of smoke high up above the Theatre Gaillard, across on the other side of the plaza. The ball of smoke hung in the sky like a shrapnel burst, and as I watched, another rocket came up to it, trickling smoke in the bright sunlight. I saw the bright flash as it burst, and another little cloud of smoke appeared. By the time the second rocket had burst, there were so many people in the arcade that had been empty a minute before, that the waiter, holding the bottle high up over his head, could hardly get through the crowd to our table. People were coming into the square from all sides, and down the street we heard the pipes and the fifes and the drums coming. They were playing the riau riau music, the pipes shrill and the drums pounding, and behind them came the men and boys dancing. When the fifers stopped, they all crouched down in the street, and when the reed pipes and the fifes shrilled, and the flat, dry, hollow drums tapped it out again, they all went up in the air, dancing. In the crowd you saw only the heads and shoulders of the dancers going up and down. In the square a man, bent over, was playing on a reed pipe, and a crowd of children were following him, shouting and pulling at his clothes. He came out of the square, the children following him, and piped them past the café and down a side street. We saw his blank, pock-marked face as he went by, piping, the children close behind him shouting and pulling at him. "You must be the village idiot," Bill said. "My God, look at that!" Down the street came dancers. The street was solid with dancers, all men. They were all dancing in time behind their own fifers and drummers. They were a club of some sort, and all wore workmen's blue smocks and red handkerchiefs around their necks, and carried a great banner on 2 poles. The banner danced up and down with them as they came down, surrounded by the crowd. "Hooray for wine! Hooray for the foreigners!" was painted on the banner. "Where are the foreigners?" Robert Cohn asked. "We're the foreigners," Bill said. All the time rockets were going up. The café tables were all full now. The square was emptying of people, and the crowd was filling the cafés. "Where's Brett and Mike?" Bill asked. "I'll go and get them," Cohn said. "Bring them here." The fiesta was really started. It kept up day and night for 7 days. The dancing kept up. The drinking kept up. The noise went on. The things that happened could only have happened during a fiesta. Everything became quite unreal finally, and it seemed as though nothing could have any consequences. It seemed out of place to think of consequences during the fiesta. All during the fiesta you had the feeling, even when it was quiet, that you had to shout any remark to make it heard. It was the same feeling about any action. It was a fiesta, and it went on for 7 days. That afternoon was the big religious procession. San Fermin was translated from one church to another. In the procession were all the dignitaries, civil and religious. We could not see them because the crowd was too great. Ahead of the formal procession and behind it danced the riau riau dancers. There was one mass of yellow shirts dancing up and down in the crowd. All we could see of the procession, through the closely pressed people that crowded all the side streets and curbs, were the great giants, cigar store Indians 30 feet high, Moors, a king and queen, whirling and waltzing solemnly to the Riau Riau. They were all standing outside the chapel where San Fermin and the dignitaries had passed in leaving a guard of soldiers, the giants, with the men who danced in them standing beside their resting frames, and the dwarfs moving with their whacking bladders through the crowd. We started inside, and there was a smell of incense and people filing back into the church. But Brett was stopped just inside the door because she had no hat. So we went out again and along the street that ran back from the chapel into town. The street was lined on both sides with people keeping their place at the curb for the return of the procession. Some dancers formed a circle around Brett and started to dance. They wore big wreaths of white garlics around their necks. They took Bill and me by the arms and put us in the circle. Bill started to dance too. They were all chanting. Brett wanted to dance, but they did not want her to. They wanted her as an image to dance around. When the song ended with the sharp Riau Riau, they rushed us into a wine shop. We stood at the counter. They had Brett seated on a wine cask. It was dark in the wine shop and full of men singing, hard-voiced singing. Back of the counter they drew the wine from casks. I put down money for the wine, but one of the men picked it up and put it back in my pocket. "I want a leather wine bottle," Bill said. "There is a place down the street," I said. "I'll go get a couple." The dancers did not want me to go out. 3 of them were sitting on the high wine cask beside Brett, teaching her to drink out of the wineskins. They had hung a wreath of garlics around her neck. Someone insisted on giving her a glass. Somebody was teaching Bill a song, singing it into his ear, beating time on Bill's back. I explained to them that I would be back. Outside in the street, I went down the street looking for the shop that made leather wine bottles. The crowd was packed on the sidewalks, and many of the shops were shuttered, and I could not find it. I walked as far as the church, looking on both sides of the street. Then I asked a man, and he took me by the arm and led me to it. The shutters were up, but the door was open. Inside it smelled of fresh tan leather and hot tar. A man was stenciling completed wineskins. They hung up from the roof in bunches. He took one down, blew it up, screwed the nozzle tight, and then jumped on it. "See, it doesn't leak." I wanted another one, too, a big one. He took down a big one that would hold a gallon or more from the roof. He blew it up, his cheeks puffing ahead of the wineskin, and stood on the bota holding on to a chair. "What are you going to do? Sell them in Bayonne?" "No, drink out of them." He slapped me on the back. "Good man. 8 pesetas for the 2, the lowest price." The man who was stenciling the new ones and tossing them into a pile stopped. "It's true," he said. 8 pesetas is cheap." I paid and went out, and along the street back to the wine shop. It was darker than ever inside and very crowded. I did not see Brett and Bill, and someone said they were in the back room. At the counter the girl filled the 2 wineskins for me. One held 2 liters. The other held 5 liters. Filling them both cost 3 pesetas 60 centimos. Someone at the counter that I had never seen before tried to pay for the wine, but I finally paid for it myself. The man who wanted to pay then bought me a drink. He would not let me buy one in return, but said he would take a rinse of the mouth from the new wine bag. He tipped the big 5-liter bag up and squeezed it so the wine hissed against the back of his throat. "All right," he said, and handed back the bag. In the back room Brett and Bill were sitting on barrels surrounded by the dancers. Everybody had his arms on everybody else's shoulders, and they were all singing. Mike was sitting at a table with several men in their shirt sleeves, eating from a bowl of tuna fish, chopped onions, and vinegar. They were all drinking wine and mopping up the oil and vinegar with pieces of bread. "Hello, Jake." "Hello," Mike called. "Come here, I want you to meet my friends. We're all having an hors d'oeuvre." I was introduced to the people at the table. They supplied their names to Mike and sent for a fork for me. "Stop eating their dinner, Michael," Brett shouted from the wine barrels. "I don't want to eat up your meal," I said, when someone handed me a fork. "Eat," he said. "What do you think it's here for?" I unscrewed the nozzle of the big wine bottle and handed it around. Everyone took a drink, tipping the wineskin at arm's length. Outside, above the singing, we could hear the music of the procession going by. "Isn't that the procession?" Mike asked. "Nada," said someone. "It's nothing. Drink up. Lift the bottle." "Where did they find you?" I asked Mike. "Someone brought me here," Mike said. "They said you were here." "Where's Cohn?" "He's passed out," Brett called. "They've put him away somewhere." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "How should we know?" Bill said. "I think he's dead." "He's not dead," Mike said. "I know he's not dead. He's just passed out on Anis del Mono." As he said Anis del Mono, one of the men at the table looked up, brought out a bottle from inside his smock, and handed it to me. "No," I said. "No, thanks." "Yes, yes, arriba. Up with a bottle." I took a drink. It tasted of licorice and warmed all the way. I could feel it warming in my stomach. "Where the hell is Cohn?" "I don't know," Mike said. "I'll ask." "Where is the drunken comrade?" he asked in Spanish. "You want to see him?" "Yes," I said. "Not me," said Mike. "This gent." The Anis del Mono man wiped his mouth and stood up. "Come on." In a back room Robert Cohn was sleeping quietly on some wine casks. It was almost too dark to see his face. They had covered him with a coat, and another coat was folded under his head. Around his neck and on his chest was a big wreath of twisted garlics. "Let him sleep," the man whispered. "He's all right." 2 hours later Cohn appeared. He came into the front room still with the wreath of garlics around his neck. The Spaniard shouted when he came in. Cohn wiped his eyes and grinned. "I must have been sleeping," he said. "Oh, not at all," Brett said. "You are only dead," Bill said. "Aren't we going to go and have some supper?" Cohn asked. "Do you want to eat?" "Yes, why not? I'm hungry." "Eat those garlics, Robert," Mike said. "I say, do eat those garlics." Cohn stood there. His sleep had made him quite all right. "Do let's go and eat," Brett said. "I must get a bath." "Come on," Bill said. "Let's translate Brett to the hotel." We said goodbye to many people, and shook hands with many people and went out. Outside it was dark. "What time is it, do you suppose?" Cohn asked. "It's tomorrow," Mike said. "You've been asleep 2 days." "No," said Cohn. "What time is it?" "It's 10 o'clock." "What a lot we've drunk." "You mean what a lot we've drunk? You went to sleep." Going down the dark streets to the hotel, we saw the skyrockets going up in the square. Down the side streets that led to the square, we saw the square solid with people, those in the center all dancing. It was a big meal at the hotel. It was the first meal of the prices being doubled for the fiesta, and there were several new courses. After the dinner we were out in the town. I remember resolving that I would stay up all night to watch the bulls go through the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning, and being so sleepy that I went to bed around 4 o'clock. The others stayed up. My own room was locked, and I could not find the key, so I went upstairs and slept on one of the beds in Cohn's room. The fiesta was going on outside in the night, but I was too sleepy for it to keep me awake. When I woke, it was the sound of the rocket exploding that announced the release of the bulls from the corrals at the edge of town. They would race through the streets and out to the bull ring. I'd been sleeping heavily, and I woke feeling I was too late. I put on a coat of Cohn's and went out on the balcony. Down below, the narrow street was empty. All the balconies were crowded with people. Suddenly a crowd came down the street. They were all running, packed close together. They passed along and up the street toward the bull ring, and behind them came more men running faster, and then some stragglers who were really running. Behind them was a little bare space, and then the bulls, galloping, tossing their heads up and down. It all went out of sight around the corner. One man fell, rolled to the gutter, and lay quiet. But the bulls went right on and did not notice him. They were all running together. After they went out of sight, a great roar came from the bull ring. It kept on, and then finally the pop of the rocket that meant the bulls had gotten through the people in the ring and into the corrals. I went back to the room and got into bed. I've been standing on the stone balcony in bare feet. I knew our crowd must have all been out at the bull ring. Back in bed, I went to sleep. Cohn woke me when he came in. He started to undress and went over and closed the window because the people on the balcony of the house, just across the street, were looking in. "Did you see the show?" I asked. "Yes, we were all there." "Anybody get hurt?" "One of the bulls got into the crowd in the ring and tossed 6 or 8 people." "How did Brett like it?" "It was all so sudden there wasn't any time for it to bother anybody." "I wish I'd been up." "We didn't know where you were. We went to your room, but it was locked." "Where did you stay up?" We danced at some club. I got sleepy," I said. "My gosh, I'm sleepy now," Cohn said. "Doesn't this thing ever stop?" "Not for a week." Bill opened the door and put his head in. "Where were you, Jake?" "I saw them go through from the balcony. How was it?" "Grand." "Where are you going?" "To sleep." No one was up before noon. We ate at tables set out under the arcade. The town was full of people. We had to wait for a table. After lunch we went over to the Iruña. It had filled up, and as the time for the bullfight came it got fuller, and the tables were crowded closer. There was a close, crowded hum that came every day before the bullfight. The café did not make the same noise at any other time, no matter how crowded it was. This hum went on, and we were in it, and a part of it. I had taken 6 seats for all the fights. 3 of them were barreras, the first row at the ringside, and 3 were sobrepuertos, seats with wooden backs, halfway up the amphitheater. Mike thought Brett had best sit high up for her first time, and Cohn wanted to sit with them. Bill and I were going to sit in the barreras, and I gave the extra ticket to a waiter to sell. Bill said something to Cohn about what to do and how to look so he would not mind the horses. Bill had seen 1 season of bullfights. "I'm not worried about how I'll stand it. I'm only afraid I may be bored," Cohn said. "You think so?" "Don't look at the horses after the bull hits them," I said to Brett. "Watch the charge, and see the picador try and keep the bull off, but then don't look again until the horse is dead if it's been hit." "I'm a little nervy about it," Brett said. "I'm worried whether I'll be able to go through with it all right." "You'll be all right. There's nothing but that horse part that will bother you, and they're only in for a few minutes with each bull. Just don't watch when it's bad." "She'll be all right," Mike said. "I'll look after her." "I don't think you'll be bored," Bill said. "I'm going over to the hotel to get the glasses and the wineskin," I said. "See you back here. Don't get cockeyed." "I'll come alone," Bill said. Brett smiled at us. We walked around through the arcade to avoid the heat of the square. "That Cohn gets me," Bill said. "He's got this Jewish superiority so strong that he thinks the only emotion he'll get out of the fight will be being bored." "We'll watch him with the glasses," I said. "Oh, to hell with him. He spends a lot of time there. I want him to stay there." In the hotel on the stairs we met Montoya. "Come on," said Montoya. "Do you want to meet Pedro Romero?" "Fine," said Bill. "Let's go see him." We followed Montoya up a flight and down the corridor. "He's in room number 8, Montoya explained. "He's getting dressed for the bullfight." Montoya knocked on the door and opened it. It was a gloomy room with a little light coming in from the window on the narrow street. There were 2 beds separated by a monastic partition. The electric light was on. The boy stood very straight and unsmiling in his bullfighting clothes. His jacket hung over the back of a chair. He was just finishing winding his sash. His black hair shone under the electric light. He wore a white linen shirt, and the sword handler finished his sash and stood up and stepped back. Pedro Romero nodded, seemed very far away and dignified when we shook hands. Montoya said something about what great aficionados we were, and that we wanted to wish him luck. Romero listened very seriously, and he turned to me. He was the best-looking boy I've ever seen. "You go to the bullfight," he said in English. "You know English?" I said, feeling like an idiot. "No," he answered, and smiled. One of 3 men who had been sitting on the beds came up and asked us if we spoke French. "Would you like me to interpret for you? Is there anything you would like to ask Pedro Romero?" We thanked him. "What was there that you would like to ask?" The boy was 19 years old, alone except for his sword handler and the 3 hangers-on, and the bullfight was to commence in 20 minutes. We wished him mucha suerte, shook hands, and went out. He was standing, straight and handsome, and altogether by himself, alone in the room with the hangers-on as we shut the door. "He's a fine boy, don't you think?" Montoya asked. "He's a good-looking kid," I said. "He looks like a torero," Montoya said. "He is the type. He is a fine boy." "We'll see how he is in the ring," Montoya said. We found the big leather wine bottle leaning against the wall in my room, took it, and the field glasses, locked the door, and went downstairs. It was a good bullfight. Bill and I were very excited about Pedro Romero. Montoya was sitting about 10 places away. After Romero had killed his first bull, Montoya caught my eye and nodded his head. This was a real one. There had not been a real one for a long time. Of the other 2 matadors, one was very fair, and the other was passable, but there was no comparison with Romero, although neither of his bulls was much. Several times during the bullfight I looked up at Mike and Brett and Cohn with the glasses. They seemed to be all right. Brett did not look upset. All 3 were leaning forward on the concrete railing in front of them. "Let me take the glasses," Bill said. "Does Cohn look bored?" I asked. That kike. Outside the ring, after the bullfight was over, you could not move in the crowd. We could not make our way through, but had to be moved with the whole thing, slowly as a glacier, back to town. We had that disturbed emotional feeling that always comes after a bullfight, and the feeling of elation that comes after a good bullfight. The fiesta was going on. The drums pounded, and the pipe music was shrill, and everywhere the flow of the crowd was broken by patches of dancers. The dancers were in a crowd, so you did not see the intricate play of the feet. All you saw was the heads and shoulders going up and down, up and down. Finally we got out of the crowd and made for the café. The waiter saved chairs for the others, and we each ordered an absinthe and watched the crowd in the square and the dancers. "What do you suppose that dance is?" Bill asked. "It's a sort of jota. They're not all the same," Bill said. "They dance differently to all the different tunes. It's swell dancing." In front of us, on a clear part of the street, a company of boys were dancing. The steps were very intricate, and their faces were intent and concentrated. They all looked down while they danced. Their rope-soled shoes tapped and spatted on the pavement. The toes touched, the heels touched, the balls of the feet touched. Then the music broke wildly, and the step was finished, and they were all dancing on up the street. "Here come the gentry," Bill said. They were crossing the street. "Hello, men," I said. "Hello, gents," said Brett. "You saved us seats? How nice." "I say," Mike said, "that Romero what's-his-name is somebody. Am I wrong?" "Oh, isn't he lovely?" Brett said. "And those green trousers." Brett never took her eyes off them. "I say, I must borrow your glasses tomorrow." "How did it go?" "Wonderfully. Simply perfect. I say, it is a spectacle." "How about the horses?" "I couldn't help looking at them." "She couldn't take their eyes off them," Mike said. "She's an extraordinary wench." "They do have some rather awful things happen to them," Brett said. "I couldn't look away, though." "Did you feel all right?" "I didn't feel badly at all." "Robert Cohn did," Mike put in. "You were quite green, Robert." "The first horse did bother me," Cohn said. "You weren't bored, were you?" asked Bill. Cohn laughed. "No, I wasn't bored. I wish you'd forgive me that." "It's all right," Bill said, "so long as you weren't bored." "He didn't look bored," Mike said. "I thought he was going to be sick." "I never felt that bad. It was just for a minute. I thought he was going to be sick. You weren't bored, were you, Robert?" "Let up on that, Mike. I said I was sorry I said it." "He was, you know. He was positively green. Oh, shove it along, Michael." "You mustn't ever get bored at your first bullfight, Robert," Mike said. "It might make such a mess." "Oh, shove it along, Michael," Brett said. "He said Brett was a sadist," Mike said. "Brett's not a sadist. She's just a lovely, healthy wench." "Are you a sadist, Brett?" I asked. "Hope not." He said Brett was a sadist just because she has a good, healthy stomach. Won't be healthy long. Bill got Mike started on something else than Cohn. The waiter brought the absinthe glasses. "Did you really like it?" Bill asked Cohn. "No, I can't say I liked it. Think it's a wonderful show." "Gad, yes. What a spectacle," Brett said. "I wish they didn't have the horse part," Cohn said. "They're not important," Bill said. "After a while you never notice anything disgusting." "It is a bit strong just at the start," Brett said. "There's a dreadful moment for me just when the bull starts for the horse." "The bulls were fine," Cohn said. "They were very good," Mike said. "I want to sit down below next time." Brett drank from her glass of absinthe. "She wants to see the bullfighters close by," Mike said. "They are something," Brett said. That Romero lad is just a child." "He's a damned good-looking boy," I said. "When we were up in his room I never saw a better-looking kid. How old do you suppose he is? 19 or 20? Just imagine it." The bullfight on the second day was much better than on the first. Brett sat between Mike and me at the barrera, and Bill and Cohn went up above. Romero was the whole show. I do not think Brett saw any other bullfighter. No one else did either, except the hard-shelled technicians. It was all Romero. There were 2 other matadors, but they did not count. I sat beside Brett and explained to Brett what it was all about. I told her about watching the bull, not the horse, when the bulls charged the picadors, and got her to watching the picador place the point of his pick so that she saw what it was all about, so that it became more something that was going on with a definite end, and less of a spectacle with unexplained horrors. I had her watch how Romero took the bull away from a fallen horse with his cape, and how he held him with the cape and turned him smoothly and suavely, never wasting the bull. She saw how Romero avoided every brusque movement and saved his bulls for the last when he wanted them, not winded and decomposed, but smoothly worn down. She saw how close Romero always worked to the bull, and I pointed out to her the tricks that other bullfighters used to make it look as though they were working closely. She saw why she liked Romero's cape work, why she did not like the others. Romero never made any contortions. Always it was straight and pure and natural in line. The others twisted themselves like corkscrews, their elbows raised, and leaned against the flanks of the bull after his horns had passed, to give a faked look of danger. Afterward, all that was fake turned bad and gave an unpleasant feeling. Romero's bullfighting gave real emotion, because he kept the absolute purity of line in his movements, and always quietly and calmly let the horns pass him close each time. He did not have to emphasize their closeness. Brett saw how something that was beautiful done close to the bull was ridiculous if it were done a little way off. I told her how since the death of Joselito all the bullfighters had been developing a technique that simulated this appearance of danger in order to give a fake emotional feel, while the bullfighter was really safe. Romero had the old thing, the holding of his purity of line through the maximum of exposure, while he dominated the bull by making him realize he was unattainable, while he prepared him for the killing. "I've never seen him do an awkward thing," Brett said. "You won't until he gets frightened," I said. "He'll never be frightened," Mike said. "He knows too damn much." "He knew everything when he started. The others can't ever learn what he was born with." "God, what looks," Brett said. "I believe, you know, that she's falling in love with this bullfighter chap," Mike said. "I wouldn't be surprised. Be a good chap, Jake. Don't tell her anything more about him. Tell her how they beat their old mothers. Tell me what drunks they are." "Oh, frightful," Mike said. "Drunk all day and spend all their time beating their poor old mothers." "He looks that way," Brett said. "Doesn't he?" I said. They had hitched the mules to the dead bull, and then the whips cracked. The men ran, and the mules, straining forward, their legs pushing, broke into a gallop, and the bull, one horn up, his head on its side, swept a swath smoothly across the sand and out the red gate. "This next is the last one." "Not really," Brett said. She leaned forward on the barrera. Romero waved his picadors to their places, then stood, his cape against his chest, looking across the ring to where the bull would come out. After it was over, we went out and were pressed tight in the crowd. "These bullfights are hell on one," Brett said. "I'm limp as a rag." "Oh, you'll get a drink," Mike said. The next day Pedro Romero did not fight. It was Miura bulls and a very bad bullfight. The next day there was no bullfight scheduled, but all day and all night the fiesta kept on. End of chapter 15.